Hello, everyone. Just a short intro on this one. Basically, we are arguing today about whether fascism and Nazism belong on the right or the left. It's kind of a continuation of our last couple episodes, as much as I didn't really want to do that. But here we are, still trying to explain ourselves to each other, and that's kind of becoming our thing, trying to understand each other, which is, there are less noble pursuits. Anyway. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I kind of pushed record a couple seconds too late, so you just kind of get dumped right into the middle of our conversation, or right to the beginning of our conversation, I guess, really. But it doesn't lose anything. You understand where we're coming from. Thank you, and talk to you.
And a question that's kind of come up a couple of times. So now that we have a better idea of what that means, to say I'm further left, I'm further right, the practical application and the genesis was, where does fascism fit? Mm-hmm. And I would like to get into that because fascism word gets thrown around a lot. And I think a lot of times it's a proxy for something I don't like. For example, the term Islamofascism was very much in vogue after 9/11. And I thought it was a very poor term because I don't think that fascism really had anything to do with Islamic fundamentalism. I think they were different ideas. They weren't the same. And to attach that was part of the trend of saying anything I don't like is fascism.
Maybe it's just because like a fundamentalist Islamic country shares some significant characteristics with the fascist government,
such as being authoritarian,
it's
totalitarian, right,
but not being, but still having private property and economic and private economic ownership of economic.
It would be
issues.
much like calling Islamo-communist.
Yeah, but Islamic countries, like even Iran,
right?
There's lots of private businesses in Iran. There's lots of government businesses in Iran too. But
if I just want to say I really don't approve of the Islamic State, I'm just going to use communism as a very a various pejorative. Yeah. I'm going to call them Islamo-communist, or I'm going to call them Islamo-socialist, or I'm going to call them Islamo-habfan, whatever, and I cheapen the word communist, socialist, habitant, whatever, by simply using it as a term for something I don't like.
Well, those are the times we live in. We've talked about that many ways. It's still a bad thing.
We
live in hyperbolic times.
Yeah. And that's why I want to talk about that. And maybe, with our massive audience of 3 people, maybe kind of start a ball rolling on this.
We've achieved 1-for-1 ratio. Right on.
I think we're better. I think we're up to 2-to-1 or something.
2-to-1?
Yeah.
Hoorah.
Let's not let it get to our heads.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the whole, people aren't looking at the meanings of the words anymore. Even the term fascist, as it occurs to me, it has a distinct concept within the authoritarian or totalitarian right. It has its own block, as we saw by that sheet that you showed.
Oh, wasn't that fun?
With its,
did you look that up? I remember you were saying you were going to check
We'll come back to that because you threw a real monkey wrench into it, and I'm actually going to push back at you a bit.
There was something I said that was absolutely ridiculous, like anarcho-socialist.
Oh yeah, the big
anarcho-syndicalist.
No, that's ruled by trade unions. It was something where you had to be an anarchist totalitarian or anarchist authoritarian. And this is like a day-nightist or
we'll come back
a wet
to that.
dryist.
We'll come back to that.
Right? I something that was a complete contradiction in terms.
I mean, when I was a teenager,
yep.
When I threw fascist and Nazi around a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Just because I was a fucking teenager. Right?
Yeah. And they were words that had a powerful shock value.
Yeah.
They had weight.
I was drawing swastikas everywhere. But never mind the fact that I wore a Sid Vicious T-shirt that had a picture of Sid on it with a swastika on his T-shirt, right? Because
but that was a different. I think everybody understood why Sid was wearing that swastika. He was doing it as a condemnation, like this is the symbol of my enemy, not something he endorsed.
not necessarily. My impression. I mean, that was just the Sex Pistols, right? They just did stuff to
shock people,
to stir the shit, right?
That's true. They did that as well. And Johnny Rotten still
does
does that.
Well, yeah, actually, so there's
He still does that.
I was talking to a buddy about this last night. That there was an HBO special that Iggy Pop put together about the history of punk, and it's only once they get to episode 3 that they get to Britain in the mid '70s, and they interviewed Johnny Rotten. He weighs like 3 times what he did back in the day.
Oh yeah, he's really put on weight. Eh?
Yeah, he looks like a bad guy from the old Doctor Who episode. He's got rolls of fat. And, but he's still trying to wear the punk gear and the hair, and he's still trying to put forth the attitude. And I'm like, dude,
mutton dressed up as a lamb
doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, for sure. The angry young man shit.
Yeah,
only works when you're a young man.
Oh, but here's the thing. Now it's cultural. Now it's systemic, right? Which brings us back to the original point. People are throwing these terms around.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, there he is.
For the viewing, for the listening audience,
he looks like Fat Bastard from.
Our moderator just put up on the screen a picture of Johnny Rotten. And he looks like Fat Bastard from the
Austin Powers.
Yeah. Oh my word. That is sad.
It's certainly different.
Holy cats.
So
time comes for us all.
We take this term fascist and we throw it around, right?
Yes.
And
what concerns me is when we throw words around.
Yeah.
They lose meaning.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's happened. There is no context anymore.
Yeah.
There's no critical thought. And it is completely hyperbolic. It's being applied to stuff it should not be applied for. And so therefore, like you said, it dilutes the meaning of it, right? And this at a time when you can't even have the dialogue about that because dialogue is all shut down. Nobody. If someone does that, you can't call them out on it in any way, shape, or form. You can't do it respectfully, or you can't try and initiate that conversation.
Yeah,
right. There's no discussion to be had. But I found this was part of the whole COVID conversation. People
the COVID conversation.
Everything that was happening during COVID and all the rules and stuff like that. Like you start hearing people compare to, okay, well, this is what leads to Holocaust and death camps, right? And I'm like, seriously, slow the fuck down, right? There is no way that this is what we're talking about. And again, that to me, like trying to draw those comparisons really degrades the horror of what actually happened in the camps in the Second World War. Same thing. Throwing fascists out there. Yeah. Fascist has a very specific meaning, even within...
It numbs people to what being a fascist really means.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, it's relative to something that I don't like.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like... again, I'm just at the point where...
It's got to be better than that. We need to demand better of our discourse than that.
Exactly. We need to demand better than ourselves. We need the good faith portion that we keep talking about, right?
When you hear the word fascism,
yes,
a fascist,
yes,
what does that mean?
That's a good question. I mean, the immediate first blush is Mussolini, right? Because that's where the term comes from.
Yeah.
The next closest thing it becomes Franco in Spain, and the Latin American dictatorships. There's definitely a line to be drawn between Nazism.
This is where I was going.
And fascism, right? Because they were two very distinct within that group.
Right.
Right.
Because that is very much, I think, something that is not at all understood in our common discourse. That people, the average person, if you say to them, what is a fascist? Boom, they come back with Nazi. That they use, I'm not even going to say that they use the terms interchangeably. They use it almost in current parlance. I'm going to throw out there for your consideration that when the average university student says, that guy's a fascist, or when they think of fascism, they think exclusively of National Socialism. And you say, well, what about Franco? They say, who?
Well, yeah.
You say, well, what about Mussolini? And they say, oh, that was the guy who was an Italian Nazi, wasn't he? You say, no, they're
Well, yes,
different-
no. I mean,
different animals.
in a lot of ways, someone, depending on the nature and context of the conversation, one might argue, and to a certain extent accurately, that one is splitting hairs. Right? Again, it depends on the context of the conversation. There's a lot of overlap between them. What actually makes fascism and Nazism, as two examples, both similar and distinct from each other. And this ties into a conversation you and I started having at the end of last time, and I've done a bit of homework on this. Right? It's the national chauvinism that goes with it. So on the one hand, they're both distinctly nationally chauvinist.
Yes, definitely.
Right?
Yes. Highly
And they have that in
nationally
common.
chauvinist.
But one's German chauvinist and one is Italian chauvinist, and so they are distinct in that regard.
And I think that the real dividing line was that the National Socialist sees that chauvinism as having a genetic origin, whereas the fascist sees it as more of a cultural origin.
Interesting.
That's not. For example, to the National Socialist, even if a Jew renounced Judaism,
Yes.
they were still tainted.
Right.
The phrase, like the tainted blood kind of type phrase. That to say that, well, my grandfather was Jewish, but he renounced his religion. My father was raised as a Christian. I've been raised as a Christian. Didn't matter. The National Socialists arrested that guy and sent him to his death at Sobibor. Whereas I don't see that line anywhere in the Italian or the Spanish fascists.
That's an interesting point.
Like there
That's
was
a
no
very interesting
genetic
point.
component.
No, you're right. It is cultural. In fact, I can't remember. I might have mentioned this along the way. I remember reading about there was a particular battle in the Spanish Civil War where some of the Italian troops got their asses handed to them at the hands of Republicans. And Spanish nationalists were cheering the Republicans because they were Spanish.
Right.
And they had beaten these Italians.
Right.
Right.
Even though they were on the same
Even
side.
they were on the, even though they were on opposite sides of the fence, at least they were Spanish, and they had shown
how Spaniards can fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, and I'm kind of hesitant to say this. I don't want to make light of the discussion points that we're having, but it's funny that how you say, the Italians is about culture, Germans is genetics, and part of me is like, well, that's because Italians have culture. I mean, I love going to Italy.
Yeah.
I've visited there and loved it, right? And Germany, it's nice.
That's nice. They make good beer. I think when you look at the Quislings of the Nazi regime in occupied Europe, they adopted that same ethos of a racial, of a genetic superiority.
Yeah.
So I think that's now you could argue that maybe they didn't mean that. Maybe they were just saying that because they knew that that's what the Nazis wanted to hear.
No, I'm pretty sure
But
that's.
I do think that I'm comfortable putting that as a defining characteristic, and in this case, the differentiating characteristic
No, I think
between-
that is spot on. That's a very interesting
between
observation.
fascism and National Socialism.
And I think to expound on that, the Quislings, they all had a Germanic component to them, right? In the Netherlands,
Yes.
you had Quisling himself
Yep.
in Norway, so
Yep.
that's the Nordic side of things.
Yep.
You had Mosley,
Yep.
and so that's the
It was
Anglo-Saxon.
a lot harder for, say, a Polish collaborator to play that card.
Right. And you didn't see it in France either. In
Well,
France,
no, you did with some of the Vichy regime.
right.
You did have some,
But they
You
didn't
did
have the
some.
Germanic side of things, right? It was, I would say that, on the French
Yeah,
side.
it wasn't a Germanic thing, but it was still like within, and also within the SS volunteers in, help me out. They were right there at the very end, 56 Panzer Corps, right at the end of Berlin.
La Milice.
Nope, they were a French SS unit. I think they were brigade size, but they could have been battalion. Charlemagne?
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, yeah, they were French. They were stridently anti-communist, which was their primary motivating factor. But a big part of that, it wasn't so much anti-communist as anti-Slavic, or they confused. To my mind, they saw anti-communist and anti-Slavic as basically being an almost wholly overlapping Venn diagram. So I do see a racial component within Vichy France. Not entirely. Like there were some who were, they were culturally chauvinistic, like the fascists.
Yeah.
But for some, there was an element of
There was a genetic
a
thing.
racist,
Okay.
a racist conceptualization of it. So I think that's the big distinguishing part. Now, I'm going to throw something out there, which is probably going to ruffle a few feathers. Both fascists and National Socialists are progressives. Chew on that.
In context, that can be an accurate statement.
In the context of progressivism as the idea of gnosis, in something that I think Barack Obama best exemplified when he made what is now a famous speech that the arc of history bends toward justice. The concept that history has an arc, that humanity has a destination that we are evolving towards, and the chosen few who have this gnosis, this knowledge of not only that there is a destination, but they exclusively know what that destination is. And they are working towards helping, nudging, urging humanity towards that destination. Fascism and National Socialism shared that very characteristic.
I would say, and the reason I said in context, first of all, I'd say the first context would be historical contemporaneous, if I've got that word right.
Yeah.
So, in light of their times, viewed through their own lenses, it was a progressivism compared to the society they were seeking to replace, right? So,
what does that mean? A progressivism compared to
I guess in this respect, I guess I'm drawing a line connecting radicalism with progressivism, right?
Well,
Because I think because
it bears
it's
asking
about
how. Like I just defined progressivism. How do you define progressivism?
You used, I think, probably in a relatively specific context, the concept of moving towards justice.
Or
right?
that there is a goal, that there is a destination.
Yeah.
Now, some might define that destination as justice. Some might define that as, say, an enlightenment. Some might define that as a purity. I don't know. I'm throwing darts on there. But there is a goal, a destination we are.
I'll generalize it even more, right? In some ways, you could take this conversation. So, the end game is better,
Right.
right? That's what we're talking
Yeah.
about. Oh man, I had a thought. Hopefully it'll come back to me.
Going on about, like, you were saying something before I asked you to define progressivism.
Yeah.
And
No,
that
I was
you were saying that
responding
they were
specifically
that they
to
were
that.
more progressive than the societies they were trying to replace.
In their eyes, at
And
least.
say, okay, so what
Right.
does so that they were more forward moving, or that they were more directed in their agenda than, say, the Weimar Republic was?
Yeah, and again, in their eyes. So that's why it's
In their eyes, yeah.
It's
because Weimar was pretty progressive in its own right.
and there might have been, at least snippets. There might have been elements in their doctrines that have something in common in some way with what we would call progressive elements to our society, right? Like it might have been to better the circumstances of working folk, right? Just not across the board. It would be just, blue-eyed, blonde-haired working folk.
In the National
right?
Socialist context, the working folk of our preferred genetic constituency.
Yeah.
Yeah, our preferred racial group, our tribe. Whereas, say, maybe with the fascists, it was just within our nationality.
Yeah. I remembered what it was. And this is, I'm really going to take a step back and just broaden the conversation at this point. Because I think a lot of what we talk about, and we have talked about in many episodes, especially the last 2 or 3, was this number 4 that we're discussing this subject?
This is the third one.
This is the third one. All right.
Yeah, because we did 2 on the actual definition of right and left itself.
Yeah.
Try to understand.
And now we're picking it
Rapid.
apart.
Or now we're doing, I think, of more of a practical application.
Yeah. So I think, and we'll actually probably draw this back around to the end of the last episode when it comes to totalitarian, authoritarian, and to the right.
Yeah.
For me, when we use the terms the right, and this ties into some of the things that you've said, whether we're talking about authoritarianism, and in some ways, when we talk about capitalism, in my mind, the two of those both involve the concept of power.
Authoritarianism and capitalism?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, because when it comes down to it, capital is power, right? It gives you power over your own life. It gives you power over other people's lives. It gives you a lot of freedom that other people don't have.
Steve?
Right? Wait one, please. I'm not done. Because I'm not opening this up to conversation yet. This is just my...
Your statement of terms.
Right.
Your definitions. Okay.
Well, it's just more my sense. This is where Trent comes from. Whenever we're having these discussions, right?
That capital is a form of power.
My impression in both these senses, when we could talk about Starboarder, right?
Yeah.
As both authoritarian or capitalist, right? What they have in common for me is the sense of other, right? I can only feel good about myself if I've got someone else to point a finger at and they are demeaned in my eyes. And I
Someone to look down on.
yes,
That you that
I can feel superior to.
a necessity to the right. You're saying is basically a hierarchy where there's someone beneath me.
I'm not. Yeah, it's. I do not feel complete without being able to identify myself as
Better than
as
at least
better than
somebody else.
And the reason I bring up both the economic side and the authoritarian side, right? Because the authoritarian side, as we've discussed, has that the genetic or the cultural. I am superior to so and so and so. I think you see that a lot amongst the wealthy and the elite. They look down on the plebs, and they go, and they treat people of a lower economic strata with disdain, disrespect, right? It's that because I'm not saying this is 100% across the board.
No, and I get
Right?
like we're painting with broad brushes here.
But
Yeah.
and again, this is just Trent talking.
Yeah.
I obviously don't think I'm incorrect,
Right.
right? But I acknowledge this is just me talking.
Yeah, you're not
right?
you're not making this your hill to die on. This you're trying to establish the foundation of conversation.
Yeah, well, and this is a foundation that I come
Yep.
from, right?
Yep.
So I'm just putting it out there. Like I had this little light bulb go off in my head. It's like,
Yeah.
anytime you ask me a question, you raise your eyebrows and look at me, like, what the fuck? you
do that?
You can at least take
No.
what I've just said and pass it through that lens.
Steve completely disagrees with you.
Well, I mean, it's about time we gave Steve a chance to talk.
I don't know if it is.
This is not a breach you wish to step into at this point?
He's keeping his powder dry for later.
Yeah, I don't know. When you talk about backing up a bit, right? Like he's saying that the Germans were this genetic nationalism, and
Can I ask one thing here
He got halfway into his sentence.
before we go any further? I don't want this to sound really PC, but can we not use the word German and Nazi interchangeably?
Sure. Absolutely.
Because I think that's important.
No, I think you're right. That's not PC at all.
And I don't like to use the word Russian and communist interchangeably. They're different things. So we could say
what about Chi-Coms?
that's different. No, not all Germans fit into the Nazi concept of the Übermensch, of the desired genetic.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
What do you call it? Their master race, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, just saying. Okay, so the Nazi obsession with the genetic nationalism, and you talked about and the Italian or the Italian fascists with Italian nationalism, and I'm like, is it that much different? Because I mean, when we're talking about European states, we're also talking about ethnicities. Italian is an ethnicity. French is an ethnicity.
But the Italians
Saxon is an
themselves and the Spanish as well regard very seriously their own internal genetic differences. The north of Italy and the south of Italy, they don't sit around the same campfire.
Well, the north of Italy was part of Austria-Hungary until the end of the First World War. So
And they look different.
yeah, they are different.
They are very different.
The cuisine's different.
The cuisine is different. The dialect is different. Like they have intense rivalry. Isn't the word,
Well, yeah,
but under the fascist,
the northernmost Italian. I can't remember if Italy's states or provinces, but the northernmost Italian little state, I'll call it, is South Tyrol.
yes, which is
Austria,
largely German speaking.
Yeah.
But my point is that under that fascist umbrella, they were still unified as Italians, where they were. The fascism sought to erase or downplay those internal divisions within Italy, and to forge a new identity that was pan-Italian, based on the cultural supremacy of that. How would you say, descendancy from Rome?
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, so what I just heard coming out of the exchange between you two is, now we're going down another rabbit hole, right? So here's the question, because now I got another question. It's a definition question. We just talked about ethnicity versus culture.
Yeah.
Are they distinct? Is ethnicity where culture and quote-unquote genetics meet? Or is ethnicity the same as culture?
I'm going to say that they are distinct.
When
Ethnicity and culture are two different things.
When you uttered the word, Steve, when you said ethnicity.
I think of at least in that context, I was thinking of ethnicity more of genetics, I guess, more in line with being very similar.
Right.
Yeah, like
So
traits
ethnic
inherited.
German, ethnic French, right?
Yeah. In other words, looking German, looking French.
Ethnic
yeah.
Hutu, ethnic Tutsi.
Yes,
Right?
yes. Yeah, I'm on that page. Like I get what you're. I understand what you mean.
But I still I still believe that what we talked about, the difference between fascism, the genetics and the cultural, you can still call you can okay. So now we can move into ethnic, but that's not necessarily genetic in the same way.
No.
Because the genetics
No, it's
was
not, yeah.
the
Yeah, 'cause
genetics.
there's part-
Nazism did not deny the genetic viability of Italians or French or Spaniards. Yeah. It actually felt that the British were
because they
were
were
kin.
Anglo-Saxon, right?
right.
Yeah.
But what the genetics piece came in, it was Jewish
Yeah.
and it was Slavic.
I think there were 3 tiers within the National Socialist universe, and that you had the top tier of the Aryans. You had a middle tier that was acceptable. And then you had a bottom tier that was unacceptable.
Yeah.
I'm not like, because one of the biggest contributors to the SS outside of the Germans was like the Hungarians, right? Like,
I think it was the Dutch.
No,
think-
I don't think,
I think
the
that-
Dutch did not have the numbers.
Oh, I think they did. I think the French and the Dutch
I
had the
just remember
biggest number of volunteers. The Hungarians had their own formations.
Yeah.
That were fighting on the Eastern Front, so they didn't really need.
yeah. So
like,
I'm
there
just
was no
curious, like what the
requirement for
Nazi view of Hungarians were, because with the Hungarians, because I don't
know.
don't really think of themselves
I
as
don't know.
Slavs.
They
either.
aren't Slavs.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
they think of themselves as just kind of-
Linguistically and I believe
Yeah.
ethnically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
they-
Magyars. They're not.
They're not Slavs.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, and I can't remember the name for the
Probably
language
just
group.
my North American chauvinism showing
The
through Eastern Europe
Finno-Ugric
is also.
language
Finno-Ugric.
group.
The closest link
Yep.
they have to another ethnic group,
Is-
linguistically at least, is the Finns.
Yeah, Finns, Estonians, and Karelians, who all live beside each other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Except for the Hungarians.
yeah, which is
Somehow
really
they ended
interesting.
up. So I think
Yeah.
that probably plays into it. They saw
Could
themselves
be.
as distinct from the rest of the Balkan
And
Peninsula.
I'm sure their long association with the Habsburg Empire
Yeah.
definitely helped.
Obviously,
Definitely.
they were half of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was probably a part of it. Also, I mean, the Nazis showed, especially as time went on, they showed a very remarkable flexibility and an ability to to make their ideology do some pretty impressive logical gymnastics to meet the requirements of their situation at the time. For example, an SS formation of Bosnian Muslims.
Yeah.
Like that's some.
There was another SS formation of just Arabs, wasn't there? Arabs?
I don't know, but it would surprise me. I mean, by 1944, all bets were off.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Because I know there was like there was a division, SS division, whose headdress was a fez.
Yes, that was the Bosnians.
Was it the Bosnians?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a fez with the Totenkopf
Yeah.
on it, and it was, you got to look at that and compare that to some of the earlier vitriol that came out, say, in the period from 36 to 39. And I think, what utter and total hypocrisy. But they
shocked.
But
they were by that stage in the war, they were prepared to compromise pretty much anything for the sake of their own survival.
Well, and anyone who questioned anything was hanged.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a defeatist.
And that was the authoritarian impulse. What the leadership decrees must be obeyed.
Must be true, right?
Yeah, well,
cannot
that's
be
it.
questioned.
Yeah,
I would agree
and
with
I
that.
think I would say that that is one of the defining features of totalitarianism versus authoritarianism. Authoritarianism wants you to obey. The totalitarian needs you to believe. Obedience is not enough. You must believe.
Actually, yeah, and I can't remember because I said I was going to do some homework on the right, and I did some like 2 weeks ago when I got home.
Yeah.
Right, and I started doing some, but now I can't remember what the distinction between the two was. Authoritarian and totalitarianism. I'm trying to remember if it was an economic distinction, actually, that totalitarianism had state control, whereas authoritarianism was just social control.
I have a rough kind of definition for you, which I grabbed, to kind of hold it aside. But I'll find it in a moment, sort of thing. But basically, to give it some shorthand, the authoritarian regime doesn't really have a unifying ideology. It wants control. That's its alpha and its omega. It's about having control. Whereas the totalitarian regime must institute itself in every facet of the citizen's life. It is totalizing. So an authoritarian regime could take power and would, say in the Canadian context, let's say an authoritarian regime seizes control in Ottawa, so long as the RCMP obeys it and carries out its instructions, it's content to allow the RCMP to exist as an institution. Whereas the totalitarian regime probably wouldn't. It would seek to replace the RCMP with its own new order police.
Right.
Or it would have to transform the RCMP to such an extent that it simply wasn't recognizable to its pre-existing.
At the very least, it would just replace it with reliable members.
Yeah, it's not enough to replace. You have to change the institution in itself so that it is reworked. That nothing, or to my favorite example of totalitarianism is Mussolini's dictum: everything is of the state, and nothing can be outside the state. And so this is why I say that some regimes that we commonly think of as fascism, I don't think they were fascist, because they were content, or the leadership was content to allow large segments of the society to remain outside its structure, so long as they shut up and didn't rock the boat. Did what they were told, don't cause any dissent. In other words, just stay in the shadows and you'll be fine. Whereas the totalitarian can allow nothing like that.
Inner party versus outside the party.
Everything must be incorporated into the ruling structure. And now I'm trying to find where it was, but I'll bring it up in it. When I see it, I'll grab it. So anyway, that's my concept of, say, the differentiation between authoritarian and totalitarian.
Okay.
Okay, so I did find it from Robert Pakenham and William Ratliff, Stanford, where they said, totalitarian regimes legitimize and practice very high degrees of penetration into all aspects of the economy, society, religion, culture, and family, whereas authoritarian regimes do not. Totalitarian regimes have dominant single parties, coherent, highly articulated, and widely disseminated ideologies, very high levels of mass mobilization and participation directed and manipulated by the regime, and a strict control over candidates, when there are any, and their policies. Authoritarian regimes have mentalities more than ideologies, low levels of political participation, and limited pluralism and competition of policies and political actors, including the press, with some constraints on regime control and manipulation of the polity, society, economy, family, religion, culture, and the press. Totalitarian systems, once in place and short of external military conquest and occupation, are much harder to change than authoritarian ones. Right.
That jives pretty much with what I came up with. Much shorter. Okay. And this is from Britannica.
Yeah.
Says pretty much the same thing. The underlying realities of autocratic rule are always the concentration of power in a single center and the mobilization of force to prevent the emergence of opposition.
Right.
Totalitarianism is distinguished from previous forms of autocracy in its use of state power to impose an official ideology on its citizens.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much what you just said.
Yeah.
In
It's
more
not enough.
detail.
Yeah. The authoritarian just wants you to obey, though totalitarian wants you to believe.
Yeah. There you go. Well done.
If we were going to nutshell that one.
Yeah.
Is it the authoritarian's okay with being feared, but the totalitarian needs to be loved?
You know what? I'm going to say that there's something to that because it has always struck me how susceptible, say, Kim Jong-un and the Supreme Council in Tehran have been to international, how would you say, their international reputations. Mm-hmm. They have been very susceptible to international condemnation and pressure, which, you know, is kind of counterintuitive, right? You'd think that the guys, I don't care. I'm running my own shots in here. But yeah, I think someone like a Kim Jong-un, for sure, he needs to be loved. He needs to believe that he is beloved by his people.
But you're talking about external forces, and I agree with you. That's come up in regarding Iran. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that news story isn't as dominant as I feel it should be. It's completely overshadowed. Well, the protests. I have no idea what's going on in Iran anymore, right?
Yeah.
And the coverage has always been superseded by Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Not that Ukraine not that Ukraine shouldn't be covered. But it's interesting, the concept. Do they need to be loved?
I don't think they
as
need
individuals.
It, but it's more of a feature in the totalitarian.
I think,
and less of a feature in the authoritarian.
The distinction I would make, where my mind went with this, just to reconcile it for my own intellect, I guess, is that they need the ideology, whatever it is, to be embraced.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of along the same lines.
Yeah.
So anyone who is failing to embrace the totality of the ideology, be it religious, be it political, that's where the problem arises. That's where that person gets in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. So I suppose that's...
Yeah, compliance is not enough for the totalitarian.
Yeah.
And I think this is something we're seeing, say, with woke culture, where it really holds sway, say, like on the university campuses. Obedience is not enough. They have scenes reminiscent of the Cultural Revolution.
Well,
where you must publicly profess your buy-in to woke culture.
That's basically Ibram X. Kennedy's thesis, isn't it? And it's not enough to just not be racist. You have to be actively anti-racist, right?
Yes, that's a very good example.
Right?
It's a very good example.
And that's his book.
Yeah, compliance is not enough.
You
must buy in.
Right?
Yeah.
But and this is, I find if you're a white, cis, hetero, male, you can't be anti-racist. You are, by default, racist.
Is that what you're saying the narrative is?
That's what the narrative is.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, I think,
if I say I am colorblind, right?
That's interpreted as being racist.
Then people will automatically say bullshit.
Yeah, you're racist.
Right? And I actually agree with that to a certain extent, to the extent that I do see color. Mm-hmm. It's just, it doesn't have any negative context to me. Right? It's cool. It's like, hey, where are you from? I'd love to know where you're from. Right? Tell me about your culture. You're a human being. I'm a human being.
The woke argument is that people of color really get annoyed when their answer for that it has to be Toronto.
Well, Toronto is a pretty exotic place. I think it's kind of foreign.
But
that's another thing.
You're asking them. You're expecting.
I know what you're saying. Yeah,
the subcontinent somewhere.
Yeah, it makes the implication that
as opposed to,
that you are not intrinsic to this location. Yeah.
And I can imagine that as a visible minority, it probably is a little annoying if you were born in Edmonton and again.
Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean,
where are you from?
Yeah.
How long
Or
you been
say
here?
you're third or fourth generation English, but your great grandfather emigrated from the Punjab.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, look, dude, how long do we got to be here before I'm as English as Churchill?
Right.
Right?
No, I get that, but I'm not so ignorant as I don't
No, I get what you're
those
saying as well.
distinctions,
Yeah, exactly.
right? And that's again, nobody puts
Yeah.
any context to that.
Yeah. Like when you're
if
saying,
someone-
tell me where you're from, you're not saying you physically, tell me your culture.
Or I will know
Tell
generally.
tell me your identity. Tell me your worldview.
I can generally get an idea based on the strength of an accent, right? And not to stereotype, but if I get in a cab and there is someone who is a visible minority who is driving the cab and they've got a strong accent, I don't like to sit in a cab and not talk to the human being who is doing me the favor of getting me from place to place.
Yeah.
Right? He's a human being.
Yeah.
And
to be
generally it's a
fair,
male.
I've had some great conversations with cab drivers. Yeah.
Right. And they are usually very interested that I can guess not just what nation they're from, but possibly what area of that nation.
Yeah.
Right? And I'll know some of the religious or linguistic distinctions.
And what I also like about talking to cab drivers is they are exposed to such a wide variety of people.
Yeah.
Like, how many conversations do we get into on a weekly basis? We can probably, like, really interesting, detailed conversation. We can probably count on two hands.
Probably count on one hand.
But the cab driver,
I get one every 2 weeks.
the cab driver has probably 6 or 7 of these conversations with people who are completely random. That's the other thing. We're trapped within our own bubbles.
Yeah.
We are trapped within our own professional and geographic limitations. Whereas the cab driver gets to meet people from all walks of life 15, 16, 17 times a day. They are exposed to such a wide variety of interesting people with circumstances completely different to them and give them totally different perspectives. So that's why I think there's such interesting people to talk to.
Yeah. But I mean, not everyone is talking to them, interacting with them.
True, but they
Right.
do get more people talking and interacting.
That's true.
For the reason you said, look, there's a human being in here. I can't just sit here and not talk to him.
And taking this in a completely different direction, but I've found whenever I've been in any sort of interactive or leadership position on a work site or in a workplace,
Yeah.
right? It astounds me how shit simple it is to engage people, to engage your coworkers or other contractors on a site.
Yeah.
Because you just you hear a slight accent, you just show some interest. Where are you from?
Yeah.
I speak a tiny bit of Arabic. I speak a tiny bit of Spanish. And the fact that you show that recognition, that interest, and you start trying to talk to them, it can be simple. There'd be younger guys on a site, and they worked for the general contractor.
Yeah.
Right? And there was like 3 of them. And they were just the gophers, the guys who just went around and did the cleanup.
The labor. Yeah.
Right? And I think they were from there were 3 of them. They were from 2 or 3 separate Latin American nations.
Yeah.
Right? But they all worked together. They banded together. And I would engage them. And so it started every day. I said, hey,
¿Cómo
amigos,
estás?
¿cómo está?
Yeah.
Right? And then I tried to
pasa,
say,
brother?
and I tried to talk to them. And I tried to call them gentlemen, but I didn't know the term for gentlemen in Spain. So I said caballeros.
Right.
Caballero, horseman, knight,
Yeah.
gentleman.
Yeah.
Right? And they looked at me confused. But then I went through exactly that with them. And they were like, yeah, that works. And so every day they started seeing me.
Could
they're
it be
saying the
that
same thing.
caballero was more of a Spanish term?
Well, yeah,
A Castilian term?
possibly.
Maybe.
Right? But they said it kind of makes sense. But, I was just trying to find a way to say gentleman. Right?
Yes. Yep.
And then I found, they were more engaged with me than anyone else on the work site.
Right.
Right. And anytime I needed a favor,
Yeah. Yeah.
like they were there.
Yeah.
Right. And I found that with my own people sometimes. There was a French Canadian woman who came to work for me, and I made sure, and it was a small staff, right? I had 4 customer service people, and I had 4 people in the warehouse, and she was one of the people in the warehouse. But every morning I came in, I said hi to everyone in the office. I went straight out to the warehouse. I found everyone. I said good morning to them. And I said good morning to her in French. And I knew her name.
Yeah.
And this blew her mind
Yeah.
that I would go out on my way to do that I would speak to her in her own language. And I knew her first name. I'm like, there's 4 of you out here.
Yeah. This wasn't a huge reach on my part. Yeah.
But it's that's, and people seem to struggle with engagement and team building.
We're an isolated society.
It's that simple humanity. It doesn't take a lot.
So, Steve,
Where have we gotten from our opening statement?
authoritarianism and capitalism linked because capital is power. Go.
He wants you to do his dirty work for him.
Well, but the thing about capitalism, if capital is power, capital is distributed. Like we look at our modern society, and yes, you look at Elon Musk and the top 1% of North American society, we'll say, and there's a lot of capital concentrated in some very
fewer hands.
But there's a lot of capital everywhere else,
And it is fluid.
it's fluid.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying it is a completely sliding scale.
But it goes back to our when we were talking about last week about authoritarianism versus individualized decision making,
Or-
right? Centralized versus individualized
The
decision
role,
making.
and how centralization
So
requires coercion.
if capital is power, I'm happy to kind of accept that, to say, okay, but it's distributed power because
Yes, it
capital
is.
is distributed.
Yeah,
throughout
I would
the
agree with
population,
that. Yeah.
right?
But the level of power is commensurate.
But it's diminishing returns, right? Especially in a democracy, right?
Yes. And especially in a free market democracy where the both sides of the financial transaction are free to walk away at any time.
Yeah. And
Elon Musk can
even
have all the billions of dollars he wants. If I'm not obligated to buy his products, sorry.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that sure, Elon Musk can buy with his capital more influence in government policy,
Or say over Twitter, like more by the fact he's able to buy Twitter, he can exercise a great deal of social influence.
But just imagine, or from like a governmental policy point of view, like Elon Musk has more capital, so he can buy lobbyists, and they can do their thing, their
influence, work their influence in the back
rooms, whatever. But it's a very diminished return, I think, because ultimately, and that only goes so far, because Elon Musk and even all his lobbyists are only so many votes, and they may not even be be able to vote for the guy they're trying to influence.
Yeah,
if they're trying to influence the head of a subcommittee, but that guy is the senior senator from Kentucky, and none of them live in Kentucky. They can't vote for him, so their influence ends up being
and also
because
maybe they can influence that senior senator on the committee, and maybe they can kind of nudge that committee to give them the return they want. The committee's influence is exceptionally limited. The committee can't write the law, and the committee can't stop an amendment coming from the floor, of Congress or what have you. So I get what you're saying.
Well, to clarify, I mean, when I'm drawing the analogy, when I'm talking about power, I'm talking about freedom as well, and I'm not talking about political power in that respect, influencing policy. I'm talking about the simple, basic freedom of being able to go out to a restaurant to eat or not. What type of restaurant do I go out to when I can't?
Right.
How often can I do that? What are my dietary choices at home? Right? How many times can I go on holiday? And what kind of where can I go? What kind of experience do I have? It's I'm just talking in
how
basic
does
terms
that-
in that respect.
I'm not entirely sure I follow you on that because I don't understand how that's a question of political freedom.
That's power. When you're talking about individual rights,
Okay.
we're talking about individualism, right?
Well, like in terms of question, just say like whether or not what I can eat, what I can afford to eat, what I can't afford to eat, what restaurants I can afford, what holiday destinations I can afford.
Yeah.
Who is exercising power over me?
No one. I'm not saying anyone. I'm not saying anyone's exercising power over me. I'm just saying one's power is limited by how much of the capital one has. The power and freedom one has, right? So and that's the analogy I'm drawing. You know, the more capital one has, the more power one has over one's life, the more freedom one has within one's life. That's kind of what I'm
just
saying.
saying more autonomy one has over one's own life. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. When you said power, like I was thinking of power, the ability to control others.
No, that's that wasn't where I was going with it, right?
Like I was thinking of a forward projection, not an internal projection.
And even then, that came parallel with my originating statement, which is I believe it's part of the human condition.
To desire autonomy?
No, it is part of the human condition to desire autonomy, but it's part of the human condition to define oneself by looking down on others, one way or another.
God, yeah, that's right. Yeah, this part was in there.
So
that's right.
So
and you saw that as intrinsic to capitalism.
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I'm not saying that's the be all and end all.
No,
I agree that
you cannot remove that instinct from capitalism.
I think it's part of it, And when we talk about concepts like progressivism, and I've always said this, to me, progressivism has been, throughout the history of mankind, it's been the ability to refine that concept better and better and better. Like the concept of the other, to me, is a very primitive one. It's so easy to do. This is why I looked at what's happened in the U.S. Since 2016 and the election leading up to that. It's been a preying on and a manipulation of the darkest,
the division,
the darkest things within us,
inspiring division within American society.
And so when I talk about capitalism having these effects, I think that's the more consistent thing throughout human. There's a lot of people who like to think that they are. Look at me. I'm
having a hard time seeing the connection between these concepts, though. Like if capital and the desire to have it to increase one's own self-autonomy, one's ability to control one's own existence, how does that link to authoritarianism, which is the desire to make other people, to have power over others?
Well, like I said,
what's the connection there?
Well, there's no immediate connection. The connection is, I believe it's part of the natural state of humanity to have these things ingrained in us. Right?
Like to desire power over others.
No, to look down on others, to be able to define oneself. Like, I don't feel good about myself unless I can look down on someone else.
So how does that link to the idea of wanting capital for oneself? Like, how can we say that is intrinsic to capitalism without saying that that's also intrinsic to socialism?
It doesn't have to be. And I'm not saying this part of the human condition doesn't exist in other places.
But what bakes it into the capitalist cake?
For me?
Yeah.
It's okay. Money is position, is prestige.
Okay.
Is pride, is dignity, right? And for a lot of people, and again, you see this in hierarchical systems all the time, right? It's just, I'm the boss. Yay me. I'm getting paid a lot of money to be the boss. Everyone listen to me. I can be right. I can be wrong. Right? I could be the biggest idiot on the planet. Right? But this is what makes people feel good about themselves. And And if not consciously, subconsciously, there's an element to being able to say, look at me, I'm more important than someone else.
But
I'm more important than a whole bunch of other
That
people.
exists in authoritarian systems as well. Like, I mean,
Or
Well, and
socialist
that's
systems.
exactly what I said.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Right?
because being the party apparatchik, where
Yeah.
where the currency of power,
If you recall,
is
It's political,
your
not
position
financial.
in the party.
if you recall 2 minutes ago,
It's just a
I
different
said it's part of the human condition. And
Yeah,
it's
but
not
you
like it
said
doesn't
it
exist
was
in other
intrinsic
places.
to capitalism.
Yeah, it's a big part of
So
capitalism.
how would we how would we influence that desire in a non-capitalist society? What would happen to that desire if we existed in a completely planned economy?
Well, that's the $1 zillion question. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that this is something that can be systematically addressed. To me, at best, this has been an ongoing social progression. It's
But-
a social and cultural.
But then
thing.
how can you say it is an intrinsic part of capitalism without also at the same time having at least a conceptualization of how non-capitalist society would be better in that regard?
I'm not necessarily claiming that.
Yeah, and how can you say then
This is okay. So
that this hierarchical chauvinism is intrinsic to capitalism? Like, I don't get that.
why can't I? Hey, man, it makes sense to me. So that's all that
But
matters.
help me understand. It's like you're saying that if it rains, the streets will be wet,
Yeah.
and the two are intrinsically linked. And so then I'm saying, okay, if it's a drought, will the streets not be wet? And you're saying, well, I can't say that. I don't know if the streets will be wet or not.
I don't think so.
Well, you kind of have to. If you're telling me that wet streets are intrinsically linked to rain, then you got to have an idea of what the streets are going to be, some degree of other than wet, if we have a drought, if there's no rain. You know what I mean?
I don't think. Somehow I feel misinterpreted here because I don't think the analogy is sound.
Perhaps misunderstood.
Perhaps.
And that might just be me miscommunicating.
Maybe,
right?
yeah, because I'm having a really hard time on. Like I said, I can't. You've made a couple of islands, but I don't see the bridges between the islands, which put them all on the same network, right? Like, I get the idea of hierarchy.
Yeah.
That it's easy to look down on people who are less fortunate than you. I think it's a very easy thing to do, and I think it's a very human thing to do.
Exactly.
But I don't see any way whatsoever, like Steve lives, that it's linked to capitalism.
It's not unique to capitalism.
Yeah.
And the only capitalism, the virtue of capitalism, like you said, is voluntary disengagement, right? Like, you can't disengage yourself from the party apparatchik who decides how much bread you get or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can,
and where you live and what job you're going to do.
But if you don't like Amazon, you
Don't buy
have
it.
you don't have to buy anything from Amazon. You can go to the store.
Yeah.
Or use some.
Or I can
other
go to
service.
Indigo.
Or go to Indigo. Or,
Yeah, or I can buy my books elsewhere, right?
right? Like,
I have, over the course, my starting point, and over the course of discussing this, at no point have I said that this is unique to capitalism, and at no point have I said.
But you said it was intrinsic to capitalism.
I said this is my sense.
I think
of
it's just
things.
intrinsic to people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've said that as well.
Yeah, no, you said it was intrinsic to capitalism.
I said it's part of the human condition, and to me, and I said this,
Okay.
that whenever we talk, this is one of the foundation
So could
stones
we
for
not
me.
say that it is more prevalent in socialism? That
don't-
socialism encourages this hierarchy more. And I'll go even further with on this to kind of set the table.
Maybe it codifies it more.
Yes, because, say, a capitalist hierarchy is fluid in that your status depends purely on your wealth. And that, if you look at the Fortune 500, It is continually in flux.
The churn, the
Yeah.
churn in the 1%.
The creative destruction element of capitalism means that hierarchy is continually in motion, and social mobility is baked into the cake. But the non-capitalist society, the socialist society, takes that hierarchy and writes it in stone. It makes it an inflexible, rigid aristocracy. And so where you are born on that hierarchy is where you will die. In, say, like in a left-wing hierarchy, which is based on, say, minority or intersectionality. Mm-hmm. As a white male cisgender, I cannot change my status. I am locked into that forever, and I am that identity, and no behavior or conscious effort on my part will ever change that.
Well, hold on to that thought, because actually, ironically, right, that's where I was going to go with this before you guys
went to town.
Fucking gangbanged me with that.
Hey, it's not that kind of podcast. This is a family-friendly...
It's not really.
Okay, it's not family friendly, but it's not that kind of podcast.
Well, I didn't mean gangbang
We'd
in that way.
make way more money if we were doing that. Oh God, we'd have sponsors like up there.
No, we'd need videos too.
We'd need video.
You would have to do video, but
video
might. It might be like that. It was the Marx Brothers movie Duck Soup. Like how much for you to make the porn movie? $20. How much for you to not make the porn movie? $100.
If anyone is wondering out there, the three of us have the phrase is face for radio. All right, go on. You have the floor, sir.
Oh fuck! I can't remember where I was going to go with this.
We were saying that we were throwing it out there to give you something to chew on. That hierarchy and this desire to look down on other people is in fact a bigger part of socialism.
No, I disagree with you emphatically on that.
Let us have it.
Because I think, imperfect as it is, I'm not claiming any perfection to socialism at this time.
The non-utopian utopia.
That's not what we're talking about right now. But socialism is, to me, is about kind of narrowing that hierarchy and taking away that,
like flattening the structure,
that disdain and that disrespect, the othering, right? And we'll come to a bit of that in a second, right? But to me, if anything, it doesn't structure it more. Maybe it gives it more
permanence.
It get more structure. I'd say it definitely bureaucratizes it. Right? There's no question about that, right? And that leads to mediocrities. I mean, that's.
But you don't see that as being more, because of its permanence. You don't see it as being more intensified.
Well, so now we're getting into, was it Locke and Hobbes, or who are the two? Like man is inherently good, man is inherently evil. You got to control man and guide him, or you got to let him go do his thing.
Let's say that human beings have a certain propensity to abuse hierarchy. But under what environment is going to cater to that negative impulse more? We're saying that capitalism, with its fluidity in its hierarchies, with its creative destruction, is going to discourage that. And that socialism, with its calcified, entrenched hierarchies, will exacerbate it.
Off the top of my head, I just can't agree with that. I'd say
your gut says no.
History proves otherwise. Right?
What?
Oh, I think the key feature actually that you're really looking for is social mobility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Social mobility, intrinsic to capitalism, but it is anathema to socialism.
Yeah. Or any kind of authoritarianism, right? Like right? Like the caste system in India, whatever. It's social mobility is
the aristocracy of feudal Europe.
Yeah. Like that's
hang on. You just took the world's
social mobility is the innovation.
Yes.
Of
capitalism.
Democracy and capitalism.
Yes.
That has brought us to where we are.
Changed the world.
And the lack of social it changed the world. The lack of social there's that's it. So pre-industrial revolution, Because there's probably social mobility, and at least economic social mobility, probably that's where it started.
Was the Industrial Revolution,
right?
Because it broke the power of the aristocratic.
That's where the modern middle class has come from.
Yeah,
exactly.
No sure.
But so social mobility is the key innovation.
Well, fuck, we are so all over the place here right now, because here's what just happened in the last 45 seconds. I heard Steve say that the caste system in the largest democracy on earth is authoritarian.
In a way, yeah, I can see, because it's non-negotiable.
It's a relic of
it's a relic of
the pre-democratic India.
And based on what we said earlier, actually, I would put forth that it's not actually autocratic; it's totalitarian.
Because it
because it's an ideology.
Concept of life.
It's an ideology, right?
I guess maybe, sure. yeah. Like, I'm not prepared. I don't know enough about the caste system, to really argue the point either way. I know it exists. And I know who Dalits are and who Brahmins are, and that's about the sum total of my knowledge.
Yeah, and I'm not claiming anything either.
Yeah, and I do know that it is very, very that it inhibits Indian progress. It inhibits Indian development to a tremendous extent.
That's very white cis male of you to say.
No, it absolutely does. It limits. You cannot take your what could potentially, like, for example, I've read many instances of Dalit programmers. Like, they have various, what do you call it, when we're going to create quotas for certain disadvantaged groups and allow them access to universities, to education, this sort of thing. What do you call those?
Affirmative action.
Thank you. They have various affirmative action programs. Mm-hmm. And so that Dalits will get educations in, say, tech, of which India is starting to be a leader. But then they simply don't get hired. They simply do not get hired by Indian firms. And so there is, Dalits are significantly overrepresented within tech firms in the United States because, like, say, a guy in California doesn't really know what a Dalit is. He doesn't care. This guy's pretty talented and I'm going to hire him.
Yep.
But that creates a brain drain of talented people leaving India to go elsewhere. If I've got a talent pool of 500 people and I've got them divided up into 5 classes, and I ignore 1/5 of my talent pool because I consider them to be of the untouchable class, I am at a distinct disadvantage compared to my neighbor who's got a talent pool of 500, which bases it purely on merit.
I can't believe we talked about how we're up to 6. We're up to a listenership of 6 now, and you just wiped 900 million potential listeners out of our.
How? How?
You just alienated a whole subcontinent.
Oh wow! Because I call them backward for having a caste system. Absolutely, 100%. And I will also tell you that is, in my mind, the number one reason why the Muslim world lags behind the rest of the world in technology, because they refuse to tap into their female talent pool. How many brilliant, how many brilliant professionals do we have access to in the West because we allow both men and women access into these professional fields? Our talent pool is double because of that.
There's no question. And so, I mean, man, we're all over the place.
But the value of labor is halved. I like to just make that joke all the time. But
yeah, okay. I get you. Because we've increased the labor supply, right? However, I would say I'm not going to dispute the truth of that, but I will say it's a price worth paying.
Oh, sure.
We've benefited. Like, as Thomas Sowell routinely points out, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Yeah. And I would say that by opening up our talent pool, that's an acceptable trade-off.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I mean, so many thoughts gone through my head in the last.
I just couldn't believe you were seriously arguing in favor of a caste system.
No, I wasn't.
Okay, good. Whew. You had me.
I wasn't. No,
that poker face had me fooled.
That was me kind of reconciling 2 or 3 concepts that we've discussed in this episode, like that came out in a single statement. I'm like, wait a minute, democracy, ethnicity, authoritarianism,
Culture versus
wait a minute,
a generic concept of, of identity.
kind of my brain fused. I need to run a comb through the strands of
Right.
the 8 words that you said, right? Because they confused me.
The wonder of social mobility.
The wonder of social mobility. But yeah, that is huge. That is
It's kind of the key thing.
absolutely, and I'll also stretch that back to the Enlightenment.
Yeah, because if you look at, I mean, that's part of the problems we're having in the West now is that, at least from my view, my ideological view, is that the increasing size of government
Yep,
has put restrictions on social mobility.
absolutely.
Right?
I would absolutely agree with
If
that.
you increase the workload or the regulatory burden for small businesses,
Yep.
it, of course, disproportionately affects small businesses. So if you got a great idea and you want to start a small business, it's a lot harder
Yep.
than if you're a guy with a great idea that's owned by the company you work for now because
Yes.
that's the way your contract is.
Yeah, because the regulatory environment is set up so that only the mega corporations are able to enter the market.
Yes. So when you come up with the iPhone that can transport you to the other,
Yeah, exactly.
the iPhone transporter all-in-one
Yep.
thing versus, but you're just some schlub in a garage, you can't build it.
Yeah,
You have to sell it to Apple.
yeah, exactly. That's the only way you can. Yes, I think that's a very, very
Right, and
very
that decreases
good
social
analogy.
mobility.
I want to come back to something because I was, and then we can come back to this. Like, we can go wherever we want from it. But
I think we're a long way from where we were trying to
Well,
get to.
I think
anyway,
what we
but-
were talking about
but-
was how you associated authoritarianism with capitalism, and
wasn't-
we were trying to
I was saying-
understand how that could possibly be.
to my mind, and it, just
Yeah.
bear with me.
Okay.
Try not to get outraged. Try
Okay.
not to question
Okay.
until I kind of
Till you're ready. Okay.
I say
Okay.
okay, go. Because I was going somewhere
Okay.
with this.
Sorry, I was just going to get my knife out ready.
I'm just putting the bullets into the cylinder here.
So, like I said, to me, it's part of the human condition. The
Yep.
othering, being able to look down on other people. I see that not exclusive to authoritarianism, but that's the worst of it.
Or do you
Right.
mean exclusive to capitalism?
No,
Or
hang on.
authoritarianism?
It's not exclusive to the. I'm not okay. Take a step back. I'm talking about 2 aspects of the right.
Okay.
We're talking authoritarianism or total and versions thereof
Yep.
on the one axis, and I'm talking about free market capitalism on the other.
Okay.
Right, or just capitalism. I don't want
Okay.
to say free market. Just
Sure, capitalism. Just capitalism.
Right,
Good enough.
The othering is a big element of that, and it's part of the natural. It's part of being human.
Okay.
Right. It's interesting about the Enlightenment. To me, progressivism, that's been human history, and it's been to dilute that concept the whole way through, and to just, and the world is a better place for it,
Right.
And when you compare caste systems compared to upward mobility, right? Upward mobility,
Social
for
mobility.
everyone, social mobility for everyone,
Okay.
right? So that's kind of the way it is. I agree with you on that, right? That has been the progression of human history.
Well, recently.
So, and what I had been going to go say with this before you guys ambushed me, just the complete outrage, confusion.
outrage. We just disagreed with you.
Been no outrage.
Yeah,
was the fact, and this
a
is
little baffled, maybe, but not
this
outraged.
this is essentially the problem I have with woke, right? They think of themselves as progressive, and they're not, right? They are the antithesis. This is the counter revolution, right? We've got right now. It's the antithesis of what it thinks it is. It's shutting down conversation. It is shutting out people. It is shunning people. It is quote unquote canceling people, right? And that brings us back to the opening statement about the outrage and the petty exaggeration that comes with being part of our society.
That woke is totalitarianism, or it is totalitarianism. Tick.
Just probably totalitarianist.
Yeah, it is totalitarian.
No, we can make up words.
Yeah, it is totalitarian.
Totalitarianistic. I like
No,
it.
it's
That
woke
works for me.
is totalitarian.
It is.
Totalitarian.
Yeah,
And on that we agree.
Totally.
Right? It's
totally.
it is anathema to what
So what were we supposed to be outraged about?
I can't remember. I just want I
I
to
will
bring
give
it back.
you some outrage.
Okay.
And then I'm going to say that fascism and National Socialism are products of the left. They always have been, and that
I
putting
was
them
wondering
on
when
the
we were going
right
to get to this.
is an info op as a result of the Second World War. That socialism, communism. I thought Jonah Goldberg put it really well in that Coke and Pepsi fight bitterly with one another, but they are both colas, and that they are competing for the same constituency. And this is the difference between the Nazi and the fascist and the socialist, that they share so many of the same characteristics, in that, the socialist wants a completely planned economy, but so did the fascist, so did the Nazi. It's just they were willing to allow the production or the means of production to remain in private hands so long as they acquiesced to state control of that economy. But the end result was the same. It was still a command economy. It was not a free market, in that there was varying degrees of totalitarianism in there, in that Franco and Mussolini were not as completely totalitarian as the Nazis were, in that the Nazis did not allow the existence of an independent religious institution, while Franco was prepared to allow the Catholic Church to exist and maintained its own symbology and its own chain of command, so long as it did not challenge the power of the state. But these are differences in the margin, that in the meat and potatoes, in the actual effect on the ground, in the life of the citizen, there was no difference for the average person in living in Franco's Spain in 1950, or in Venezuela of today, or any socialist state. And you could say, though, the modern conceptualization of the new left, I can say, or I can make, I think, a very convincing argument that the kind of economic system envisioned by the New Democratic Party of today, or the more radical elements of the Green Party, is exactly that of Franco's Spain in 1950, or Nazi Germany of 1937. Tell me where I'm wrong.
You brought this up, and this, I think, is because you brought this up at the tail end of the last time.
Yep.
And this was the homework I was referring to.
Yep.
Right. And with you saying that, tell me where I'm wrong. Okay, this is probably the most trepidation I've had going into a conversation with you since we began doing these things, right? Because, I started doing a little bit of research on this, and I was very dissatisfied with where it was going.
The research.
Yeah, because I was like, I kept on going, scrolling through Google page after Google page after Google page, going, why is totalitarianism and authoritarianism considered right? And
that's a difficult,
right?
That's not easy to do.
That's essentially what,
because you're making massive, that's an incredibly biased and prejudicial statement. Because you're denying the idea that totalitarianism can be left wing at all.
No, hang on a sec. All right, you asked the question, and in good faith, I'm seeking to answer that question.
I didn't ask that question.
You did.
I asked how can you say? Okay, you know what? You're right. Carry on. I'll let you ride with it.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
well, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome, sir.
This is very nice of you.
Yeah.
I was seeking to answer your question,
Yeah.
right? And I found that, just the names of the websites I was coming up with, right? First of all, it was very cloudy. Like, no one ever answered the question. Because what you seem to be asking, because you put forward the thesis statement that authoritarianism was considered right.
No.
What was
No.
presented as right starting after the Second World War.
Yes.
Okay.
Or no, that I presented that Nazism and fascism were presented as right, not authoritarianism.
Okay.
Yeah, authoritarianism is a
remember
massive.
the old
basket.
conception going back to 2 episodes ago.
Yep.
The old conception of this whole nonsense was that you're starting in the middle, and you kind of, at least on the right, you got more free, and then all of a sudden,
More individualistic, and then all of a sudden, boom!
boom, back to authoritarian.
Yeah, like,
and
how
whereas
the
if you
hell
went
did that
left,
happen?
you just got more authoritarian.
Yeah. There was a logical progression on the left. But the progression as you went further right on the axis made no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. That the
Well,
extreme
so-
right is just as totalitarian as the extreme left.
Well,
Yeah.
this is where I find
But
that
there was no gradient there. There was no linear progression. It made no sense.
Yeah.
So here's where this is the pushback I've got
Okay.
right now. Right. This is
Yeah.
I didn't want to get to this point quite yet. All right. The names of the websites I ended up with were just, it's just like, I can't take these things. Like, I don't know who these people are.
Like, they weren't reliable sources.
Like, it's just like, I can't come back and quote these to you guys or into this microphone.
Yeah.
Right. But then I got to head scratching. Right. And so this is my pushback to you because I feel like I've been thrown into a logic loop. Right. And that logic loop is, I'm being asked to explain why Nazism and fascism are considered right.
Yeah.
Because they shouldn't be.
Right. I'd say that's accurate.
And
That's an accurate summation. Yeah.
right. And my response to that was then, and it's kind of what I circled back to, is because this isn't me saying this. Right?
Okay.
This is, and this is going back to what little I remember of political science back in university. And, a whole bunch of charts that Steve brought up last time, right? I'm not the only one in the world who considers this a two-axis concept, that the right is both is an authoritarian concept on the one hand and an economic concept on the other, right? And they're not necessarily always together.
Is
right?
that not the logical fallacy of the appeal to authority?
Well, and so that's what I'm hearing, right? So this is the logic loop for me.
Yeah.
Right? You're asking the question, why is it considered up here?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, why is it considered on the right of the spectrum?
And I'm saying, well,
I can't tell you why, but everyone's been saying it is, so there's got to be a reason for that.
I'm not the one who's saying it, but political theory seems to be expressing this, and you're saying, well, political theory is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, I don't even know where to go with that. However, okay, so I'm going to respond to some of the details of what you stated. First of all, Franco's Spain. Franco was definitely authoritarian and not totalitarian when it comes down to it, right? He's,
I would say he leaned more. I think there were totalitarian elements to what he did, but I don't think he was nearly as totalitarian as Mussolini or the Nazis.
No, he was definitely. So there was the Reconquista. So it was very much the Spanish ethnic chauvinism going on.
The cultural chauvinism of Spain.
The
superiority of Spain.
Somehow he had both sets of monarchists, the Carlists and the Alfonsos, involved. He had the military right wing.
Yeah, he had the church.
Or we'll say the military. I won't say right wing.
Yeah.
He had the church.
Yep.
So he had all these elements going for him, and the phalangists. So there were some. There was a fascist type movement, the Phalange. And I haven't done enough research on the Lebanese side of that. So we're only going to use that
We'll
word
set those guys
in
up for
that
a bit.
context for now. Right? But when it came down to it, it was, compared to Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany, and even compared to Roosevelt's U.S., Franco's was the most capitalist system on the go. And again, going back to the distinction we made, it was authoritarian because it brooked no political opposition. But it wasn't totalitarian because it wasn't imposing an ideology. It certainly wasn't imposing an economic ideology, right?
I would disagree with you on that, in that prior to the summit with Eisenhower in 1953, when things began to change, Franco's Spain pursued a vehement policy of autarky and extreme government regulation of all aspects of the economy, in that he allowed property to remain in the hands of the landowners. He allowed capital or the means of production to remain in private hands.
Yeah.
But there were wage price controls, export controls. There were all manner of regulation which defined every waking moment of commercial activity. And I would also point out that that is one of the reasons why Spain lagged so far behind in the it didn't participate in the post-war boom at all until the Americans pressured them into those reforms in the early to mid-1950s.
No, interesting. I'm not aware of the post-war period all that much. I'm way more aware
Of, say, the 30s, the Civil War era.
the Civil War and shortly thereafter, right? And certainly during the war, right? Not the Civil War, during the Second World War, right? The economy at that time. And again, I hate to do it to the listeners, but now we're circling back to socialism. So I need to ask the question.
Yep.
Since we seem to have come to the definition of socialism as state-owned, a state-run and controlled economy.
Yeah.
Right? I'm trying to remember where Norway fits into this again, right? Because we know Norway has some state-owned, socialized industrial economy, especially when it comes to the oil.
Yep.
Right? So, is Norway, by the at least 2-1 consensus definition of socialism, is it a socialist nation?
Steve, in our hour of need, we turn to you. And I know how you're gonna answer this, and I like go.
Do you know?
I know. I can feel it in my bones.
Oh, I hope I live up to your expectations, or hopefully, or perhaps I'll completely. Well, no, I don't think we talked about this before. Like Norway is a capitalist economy with socialist institutions in it.
Yeah, it's a welfare state or externality capitalism.
Right. But for that matter, so is Canada, right? Like, okay, so Norway has Statoil, which is their government control of the energy industry. Canada has government control of the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
Right. So Canada is a
or like how I think it was the president of Denmark was saying, he really didn't like it when Bernie Sanders called them a socialist country.
Yeah, no, I think
we're not socialist.
And the Swedes have come up with the same thing, or the same deal, right? It's just they're not. Like, I mean,
the welfare state is not equal to socialism.
Well, and that's why I want to make sure.
This is something, and this is something that the right, I think the American right largely, is a mistake the American right largely made, because they compared all welfare to socialism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and they said, "Oh, that's socialism."
It was a very binary approach.
Yeah, it's all communist. It's all right. We can't have Social Security, Medicare, all that stuff. That's all socialism. It's welfare, right? Because it's like, especially the American socialized medicine, which is the wrong term, is really welfareized medicine because it only applies to
Right. The seniors and the poor.
It's not universal.
Yeah.
It's not,
It was-
and it uses, like, with the exception of the VA. The VA in the United States is truly socialized because it's completely government controlled top to bottom.
Yeah.
If you're going to use the VA
I'd
system.
say it's the most comparable to Canada's.
If you're on Medicare or Medicaid, that's government insurance being used to access the private system,
Right.
right? Whereas the VA is mostly it's very analogous
Separate hospitals,
It's very
yeah.
analogous to the Canadian system, right? It's
Yeah.
separate. It's government from top to bottom.
Yeah.
So Statoil, okay, so I don't know. I've never been to Norway, so I don't know how they retail gasoline there. If it's all Statoil stations, or if there's a Shell station or an Esso station, or not. I don't.
I don't recall.
Right.
I honestly don't recall. I remember seeing a lot of Statoil.
So yeah, I don't, and I don't, and I don't
But
know
I don't
if Statoil,
recall-
if Norway's, like all Norway's petro development is all
Yeah.
Statoil, or if there's other
Yeah, I
companies.
don't
Right?
recall.
Because here, like there's a bajillion companies from Edmonton to Grand Prairie. There's
Yeah.
there's
Probably.
15 different companies.
Yeah. Different retailers of fuel.
Yeah, but doing energy development.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah, that's true.
And
You
what
know,
level of it? You
there's-
got you got exploration, you got drilling, you've got
no, but
Upstream, downstream, and
yeah,
midstream.
there's all
But
sorts
the
of
well,
stuff.
the well belongs to somebody, right? So,
Yeah.
you go just west of Drayton Valley to Cynthia, and that's Imperial Oil.
Yeah.
You go a little further past, and there's some Murphy. You go to
Yeah.
Dawson
Yeah,
Creek,
exactly.
that's in Canada. You go to
It's held in private hands.
Yeah.
It's not all controlled by the state.
yeah.
Well, I have to say,
No, the
you know,
state essentially just taxes it,
Yes.
right? It taxes royalties, and that's,
Yes.
So
and I'm sorry to bring it back to this question, but
No, it's relevant.
once
I think it's
once
relevant.
again, I find myself it's
Relevant.
almost like playing chess with the devil with you guys, right? When it comes to the concept of social, because
No, but what I'm just
as
trying
you
to-
were describing it, you know, and you said you uttered the fateful words, the right in the U.S. So we don't even know what that means yet. We haven't hammered that out.
we can blame it on Republicans.
Yeah, we'll say
Right.
the Republican Party.
we can blame
Okay.
it on Republicans, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, I'm sure some Democrats feel that way too, right? But if you look at socialist parties,
yeah.
for the last 100 years in Western Europe, in quote unquote the Western world,
Sure.
right? They have not all been, and certainly not exclusively been, about state control of
The economy.
the economy.
Well,
They haven't been.
would
They
you
have
say-
been. They have been about social programs.
Yeah.
And-
Would you say it's fair to say that the economic or the policy ambitions of the left have changed drastically since 1991?
You know what? I'm going to say this out loud. So get ready to react however you want. I haven't paid any attention.
Because I would agree with you in that prior to the end of the Cold War,
Yeah.
the idea of classical socialism, which is the elimination of capitalism, the elimination of private property, and the command economy, was much more broadly held as a goal on the left. After the 1990s, with two events that I think are linked and were heavily influential. One was the collapse of the Soviet Union. The second was the revolution on the right, inspired by Margaret Thatcher. And that in the aftermath of that, I think the left, very few voices on the left today, I think, are calling for the renunciation of capitalism and private property and calling for a complete command economy. There are some, but I think they are not the mainstream, nor do I think they're the majority. I think the majority consensus on the left calls for the retention of the private ownership of the means of production, but wants a greater role for the state in regulation and control and wealth redistribution.
Okay. So hold those thoughts. Again, this can go either way, right? Because Steve raised an interesting concept. Now I'll get to it in a second here, right? again, I don't think up to 91. I thought you were going to say the reverse of what you actually ended up saying. Up to 91, socialist parties across the board have not exclusively, and I'm not citing any examples here, but they haven't. And this is why my confusion comes, because my experience of the concept of socialist parties, Europe, Canada, not in the U.S., just leave them out of the conversation, right? Has been to push for programs that we have since defined as welfare programs. And
push
not,
for the welfare state.
And not, so the welfare state. So I think that's why I feel like it's playing chess with the devil. It's like every time we bring up the word socialist with a capital S and socialist parties.
Sorry, when you say we're playing chess with the devil, you're just saying we're moving the goalposts all the time?
I feel like that, yeah.
Okay.
Right? Because it's
Try
like
not to. But.
well, no, and I'm not really accusing you of anything. I'm just kind of like I just realized how frustrated I am because really we're back here again.
Well, I think
like what the fuck.
What we say when we say socialism is different than your conceptualization of it.
Right, but so that's why we keep trying to hammer it down. Right?
Would this be helpful to you? I remember in the late 1980s, I used to go to meetings of a communist party and various affiliated organizations because I found them fascinating, and I got to have some really good conversations because they kept seeing me there and they thought I was a fellow traveler.
One of them,
yeah. And there was a fellow, I can't remember his name.
Probably best not to say it out loud, anyways.
Yeah, I guess. He was there, and he was going to run under the Communist Party of Canada ticket for Old Strathcona, and he was there to kind of canvass support. Would you volunteer for my campaign, what have you? And someone basically said, look. I'm going to, of course, consider it was provincial, and the juggernaut, that was the Lougheed Conservatives. Somebody was saying, look, you're going by doing this, you're distracting effort from the NDP, and you're kind of hurting the entire cause. So why should we throw in with you? And he said, the difference between us and the NDP is that the NDP wants to make the capitalist system work better. We want to get rid of it altogether.
Right.
Would you say that's fair?
With anything
would you subscribe to that?
With any question that comes out of your mouth directed at me,
this is not a trap. This is not a trap. I'm not trying. I
would say that fairly accurately sums up
where
I'm at.
Yeah.
Right?
That when someone thinks of themselves like, say, a Bernie Sanders kind of type, or say a social democrat, or like an Olaf Scholz. Someone of that nature says, I am a socialist. What they're saying is, de facto, I want to make capitalism work better. I don't want to replace it wholesale.
Exactly. It's about making our society better, right? And that's why I keep talking. I think of socialism. I like to take the capital S out of it and give it a small s.
Okay.
Right. And it's just and it is. To me, it's never been about state ownership of anything for its own sake.
So here's the gotcha. This is where you need to be careful.
Okay. Oh, I appreciate the warning.
Yeah. How would you characterize one of those systems?
One of what systems?
Say one of these systems that want to make capitalism work better. Or like the modern, say the new left interpretation of socialism. One of these ones is saying, look, okay, we're going to accept the basic premise of capitalism. How would I identify one of those?
Well,
if I was going to go into a place like, say, like Western Europe, and I was going to go into, a place like Belgium or Holland, where I don't really know the who's who, I don't really know the political situation, what characteristics in policy could I look for to determine who subscribes to this modern conceptualization of socialism as making capitalism work better?
And this is where we come back full circle to two concepts now. All right? And now we're going to butt heads again, because now we have to get back to redefining things, right? Because, follow me here.
Okay.
All right? What would I call that?
Or
I would call it a social democracy.
how
right?
would I
But
identify
now,
it? How would I know a social democracy from a non-social democracy?
well, this is a conversation we have had many times in many different episodes, right? Because now, when I say social
Yeah.
democracy, now I'm taking what I consider the left-right axis of
Okay.
economics,
Okay.
and in the social,
Yeah.
and the up-down / left-right axis
Of the economic.
of the political,
Oh, sorry. Okay.
right? And democracy to me is like, not farther away from totalitarianism.
Okay.
That is and closer to the individualism,
Okay.
the libertarian side of things,
Okay.
right? So, but we've been having problems with that diagram, right? So now I'm kind of like,
Okay.
well, what would I call
set
it?
that aside. Just
and-
give me some characteristics. If someone said to you, I favor the social welfare state, give me some examples of policies that I could expect to hear from that person.
Well, it's what we've always talked about. In our whole conversation about
want you
the
to-
definition of socialism.
I want you to give me a summary of that.
I point to Norway.
Okay.
I point to basically almost every Western European nation.
Okay,
Right?
so that it has a coastline. In order to be social welfare, you must have a big coastline?
Now you're just being obtuse for the sake
I
of it.
am. I want to pin you down, and I'm warning you, this is where I'm going to trap you.
Well, it's the social welfare state, as we
Okay,
said.
what does that mean?
It means basic needs are met. I mean,
Okay.
it's going to vary from place to place. But
So
what do they have in common?
Income supplementation?
Or wealth redistribution?
Inevitably, there's some wealth distribution.
Okay.
It's in the form of taxation, right? We haven't had the coercion
Okay.
conversation.
Okay,
yet, right?
no coercion conversation, just we identifying characteristics.
Right.
How about the role of labor unions?
Socialized medicine,
Okay,
right?
Okay.
The role of labor unions, and like at best, for me, a nation that has, in a developed nation, trade unions are like what Churchill said about democracy. Mm-hmm. It's the worst thing going, except for everything else.
Okay.
Right.
Fair enough.
Our society is better off for having trade unions.
Okay.
It comes with a shitload of problems, and I would argue that certainly since the 20s and 30s, and definitely since the 60s, the nature of the conversation needs to have changed, because a lot of the basic needs, like the egregious needs that need to be taken care of in those two time periods,
Okay.
have been addressed.
okay. So what have we got so far? We said redistribution.
Mm-hmm.
We said
Some kind of government assistance and access to health.
some kind of government assistance and access to healthcare. Some
minimums-
kind of government assured minimum standard of living.
Yeah.
Like nobody's going to be allowed to starve to death in that society.
Or freeze to death, or
freeze to death.
or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like it's
Yep.
and again, to me, this has been the natural progression of what I
Okay.
keep talking about. Like,
Is there
I've-
anything else?
probably
Take a stab. Anything else that comes to mind?
I'm going to say no, and you're going to hit me with something, and we're going to go from there.
about price controls.
What do you think? I think Steve knows where I'm going.
I don't know.
Interference in the markets in form of, say, like
Regulation.
like supply chain management.
That is not unique to the left. It's not unique to socialism.
Okay.
Right? You get enough of that on
You're
the
right.
right. You get protectionism on
You're
the
right, because all 5 of those were key points in the National Socialist Program. Mm-hmm. All 5 of those.
Yeah.
So,
But not for people of Jewish faith, not for...
No.
And...
nope. But for members within their targeted constituency, which was people who fit that very narrow definition of who they considered to be their tribe. In fact, these same these same 5 characteristics we have identified were also a key part of Mussolini's structure.
Well, yeah.
So this is why I'm saying to you that, or this is a key part of my assertion that Nazism and fascism have far more in common with the left than they do with the right.
I can only disagree with you. I mean, you're like, what I was attempting to do was
Then shoot me down. Tell me why I'm wrong. Other than to say the appeal to authority, which is I can't tell you why, but I can tell you that these really smart and authoritative people say this.
well, no,
Set that aside.
It's not
Set that
smart
aside.
authoritative people. That's it's like saying
It's still
here's what I
the
hear you
appeal
saying.
to authority. It's still a logical fallacy.
Trent.
It's not an argument.
The definition of the word blue
Yeah.
in the Oxford Dictionary, I present to you that it may not be the definition of the word blue as Oxford Dictionary presents it. So defend that.
I could
I'm like, well, listen, I'm not the one who wrote all this political theory. Like, if you got a beef with that, go fucking take it up with them.
It's
right?
not that it doesn't work that way, dude.
It does.
If you're going to say that those guys are on the right, say the fascist and the Nazi are on the right, you have to be able to articulate why that is. Otherwise, you're admitting to me your entire position is groundless, and you're simply repeating what you've been told.
No, you're nitpicking. You are.
Do you think I'm nitpicking?
You are cherry picking.
I don't think I'm cherry picking.
You are absolutely cherry picking.
I'm not cherry
you are
picking.
telling me that
You're not picking.
if you are saying that based on those 5 points, Nazi Germany,
Yes, was on the left.
hang on, Nazi Germany, and the current state of Sweden, the current state of Norway, the current state of the Netherlands, Denmark, any of the social welfare states in Western Europe, right? If you're saying that they have more in common than they don't, based on those 5 points, I call bullshit.
No, but that's not what I'm saying.
That is what you're saying.
No.
You're saying
I can
that
give
by
you
virtue
a raft
of those
of
5
differences.
points, by virtue of those 5 points, that makes them left. I said no, it doesn't make them left.
I think what I'm trying to say in my agreement with Lance is not that that Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, the welfare states they're the middle, kind of from where I sit and where Hitler sits, right? That it's a logical progression from my position through social welfare states to authoritarian fascism or Nazism.
Yeah, that's
what we're trying.
The Scandinavian welfare states are far to the right of the Nazis.
Yeah.
Significantly
And we're not
to the
we're
right
not trying
of
to
the
we're not
Nazis.
trying to call
Only on
them-
one of the axes.
No,
Yes.
across the board. The Scandinavian states have a very robust pluralistic political culture. Very robust. They accept all manner of dissent within their political structures, and they have entrenched that in their mechanisms.
Yep.
They have a much higher degree of economic freedom.
Yeah.
Sweden, it's way easier to start a concern and economic enterprise in Sweden than it is in Canada. Far and away easier.
I believe
or the
it.
United States, Canada actually,
Or
more economic freedom than the United States.
Yeah, exactly. Far less regulated. There
That
is
blows my mind.
not only are there the free labor unions within Sweden, but there are labor unions for businesses in Sweden that exist outside the control of the state, that are completely private entities. There is freedom of religion within the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
That you couldn't have anywhere in the Nazi state. There is no concept of.
I feel completely shot down at everything that's come out of your mouth right now.
There all of these concepts of individuality and freedom of choice.
Yes.
Put them further to the right than the fascist or the Nazi. They are more individualistic choice. Individual choice is what puts them further to the right. Now, if you disagree with me on that, because I can see the cognitive dissonance going on over there, where you're having a hard time reconciling the idea of free choice with being right.
Do you need another smoke?
Okay, cool. But tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where that falls apart. Tell me the flaw in that analysis other than simply saying, well, other people don't agree with you. You got to have more than that, dude.
The farther we get into this conversation, again, the more I just feel that you're just telling me blue is blue because I say it's blue. Like
no,
what's coming out of your mouth is
no.
Trent,
that's your defense.
Here's my end point, but I'm presenting it as a start point. And every logic loop that we have in between is going to define that.
This is blue. This is blue. These are not the same color.
Yeah, but which one did you start with? I can't remember. Which one's the opening statement? Which one's the closing statement? No,
there's the only way anyone can say that the Nazis were right wing is to make some kind of reference to their authoritarian nature. And that makes the prima facie groundless assumption that authoritarianism is somehow right-wing.
Okay, so...
And you have struggled on this day to define that.
Stop right there, please. All right? When we started this conception about 45 minutes ago, you said you're taking totalitarianism and authoritarianism and you're setting them aside. We are not discussing those. We are specifically discussing fascism and Nazism.
Okay.
And why are they on the right? And we're not...
Or why are they on the left?
No.
Or where should they be? Where should they be?
Yeah. Right. Why are they considered to be on the right? Because your argument is that they don't belong on the right.
You're right.
Right. So what I'm going to do right now is what I should have done in the first place, is to pull authoritarianism and totalitarianism back over here, because they are considered, by the definitions of what we came up with for authoritarianism and totalitarianism, Nazism and fascism fall under those categories. In fact, they both fall under totalitarianism.
Yes, they do.
So now we're back to arguing whether or not that's on the left or that's on the right. You know? And so really, here's the confusing part. The confusing part is, and this is why we need at least two axes, and we obviously don't agree on this.
No, I don't. I see.
When it comes down to, and we come back to our fundamental disagreement, right? I see left politics or left left economics, maybe not extreme left economics, but what I'll call social or socialist or social welfare policies. That's left. And I see individual rights as left.
Okay, hold on. I'm not challenging you. I just want clarification.
Yeah.
When you're talking about left-wing economics, is your focus primarily on wealth redistribution, or more along the lines of the government being able to regulate and say regulation? When I think of that, I mean, like, say, labor law, environmental law. I guess maybe that's good. Equity. Do you think of it as, is your emphasis what you consider the more important nexus to be more along the lines of wealth redistribution, or those other, like, say, back end stuff, or more front end stuff?
Well, it's more the policies you talked about, and I put those into what
even
what you were
weight to both.
Well, it's more like what you were saying about making capitalist society better, right? That's how I've always looked at it, right? Okay. And that's how I've viewed the history, especially, again, in the last 100 years. We've come a long way, and even in the Industrial Revolution, some social reforms came out. It's the social reforms they're like that, making capitalism better. I like that. Actually, that's a great way of presenting it. Wealth distribution, fundamentally for me, is only necessary to the extent that it fulfills those other things, right? Making capitalism better, right? And again, it's not imposing rules for the sake of imposing rules. It's kind of looking at stuff and going, okay, people are dying of
Yeah, it's like to address a known problem.
Coal dust in their lungs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't let that happen, right? And that's basically what I look at it. Fundamentally, what it comes down to, I see individualism as a left concept, and you guys see, so I see, and you guys see left economics as authoritarian.
Collective.
As authoritarian.
Yeah, or correct me if I'm wrong, but we see it as more collective, and an inevitable byproduct of collectivism is coercion.
I think I've said this before, but it all comes.
I know
down
you don't
to,
share that. Yeah.
It comes
I know
down
that's
to
contentious to you.
It comes down to human respect. It comes down to respect. How do you define your respect for your fellow man? Right, and that has been the progression of humanity over time. It's to get farther and farther away from that primal othering, right? That need to look down on others. We define our family in greater and greater circles as we go on. Right? It's gone from me and my mate to the tribe to the nation.
Can I give you an example? Say, create a scenario based on the idea of coal dust in our lungs.
Sure.
We have a very large commercial coal mine. And we got black lung causing a problem here.
Yeah.
So maybe we should do something about that.
Yeah.
So we have two approaches. The one where we could say we're going to create legislation which controls the working conditions.
Yeah.
Then we have a guy who's, let's say, I've got kind of a small coal seam on my farm, and I don't sell that coal. I just use it for my own personal use, and maybe I sell it to my two neighbors down the road.
Yeah.
And the amount that I do, where I go in there, say me and my kid, we go in there and we chip away with very, very, very small amounts. We can't afford to comply with that legislation that says we must have these ventilation systems, we must have these personal protective equipment. We don't have any of that stuff. And we want to say, well, look, it doesn't really apply to us because we're such a small little operation that it doesn't really mean anything to us.
Yeah.
But the law is the law.
Yeah.
And now we can't operate it anymore. The other alternative approach would be to say, hey, look, we got people who are, dying of black lung. We don't want that. How about the miners' union and the coal mine reach an agreement between themselves as to say, okay, this is the PPE we're going to use. These are the ventilation systems we're going to use. These are the health and safety policies we're going to use to mitigate this problem. But we do this ourselves without the need of state intervention, without the need of the heavy-handed legislation.
Okay, so that all sounds very reasonable, right? And to me, there's a lot of gray area between those two concepts.
There is.
Right? I will state for the record that I've never been about... I've always pushed back against the law for its own sake.
Right.
Right? I've always been an intent... Has the intent of a law been met? So when you're talking about a small operation, if one chooses that direction, we're going to legislate this, right? That legislation needs to be holistic enough, is the best word. I was going to say broad. No, that's not the right word.
Complex
and
enough?
comprehensive and complex. It doesn't have to be complex. If you got the right
possible situation, it would have to be incredibly complex.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why you either have consultation or you have to be able to adapt it. You need to be able to amend. Where I'm going
with this is that the basic respect for our fellows,
yes,
that basic respect for the health and safety of our neighbors,
yes.
Would you then, looking at that scenario, could you at least allow for the possibility that is not exclusive to the left?
To an extent. Right now, so here's,
I'm happy.
Here's the wet dream, right? The wet dream is, and I've said this before, right? I would love to be able to expect the best out of my fellow human beings. Be they business owners, be they workers, be they politicians. And that is not always the case. Right? And so ideal world, having the union, hell, ideal world, you don't even need a union.
Yeah.
Because
ideal world.
The business owner
Yeah.
is saying, I have a responsibility to my people.
Yeah.
And we get these gratifying examples. You know, it's like, I don't know, 100, 1,000. You just hear in the news about some guy who's selling his business, and he has kept diligent track through the 40 years that he's owned this business of everyone who's ever worked for that business and how many days they worked for him. And they get a share of that sale based on how many days, weeks, months, years that they've worked there, right?
Yep.
Because they fundamentally recognize it. And you know that person has treated his people while he's taking care of them. The safety, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg of the attitude that this person has, right? As you were describing that situation, that's great if you've got the workers and or a union and the owners talking. But, you know, that's when it comes down to, you know, power and will and good faith, right? Because if you don't get, and it also comes down to knowledge, right? What kind of expertise is being used here? Because, you know, either of those two parties could fail to recognize a due diligence in whatever agreement they come up with, right?
So you're saying that my alternative, while really sounding really nice, is just not practical.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's risky. It comes with risks, right?
That are, say, more risky than the legislative approach?
Well,
the statist approach?
Where I'm always going to go with this is Bhopal.
Okay.
Right?
So that you're saying that all things being considered as a basis starting point for discussion, we're better off with the statist approach. That there's less that can go wrong.
No, I'm saying there's always something that can go wrong.
There's less that can go wrong. Or that the consequences, that the trade-off that we're going to get, you would rather, as a general rule, in the absence of further data, come down on the side of statism.
Let me throw a scenario back at you, and this is from a libertarian point of view, right? You as a business owner are free to do whatever you want.
Yep.
Right? You can run that business operation however you want.
Yep.
Right? If people die working for you, all right, you are fucked. All right?
Okay.
And so this is the thing.
Like,
right?
this is the law, or this is...
Well, this is the statement.
Okay.
Right? This is the statement Trent is making.
Gotcha.
All right?
Okay. Yeah.
You're telling me in good faith that you're going to run this business and it's going to be acceptable to our social norms.
Yeah.
All right? Now, if we end up with widows and orphans because of you, you are going to fucking pay for it.
Okay.
Right? That is what we say as a society. All right? We've started saying it more and more and more. Now, how do we, and that's the risk.
Yeah.
Right? Now, maybe this company takes it seriously and does something about it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they don't and they luck out, nothing ever happens. Maybe they do take it seriously and bad luck, something happens.
Is there negligence? Is negligence a prerequisite to this condition?
I don't know.
I think you do need to know.
Because that's what exactly.
Because if you're going to tell me I'm effed, I need to know that before I hang up my shingle. If I'm going to say run a construction company, and you say to me, okay, dude, you can do whatever you want, you can set up whatever work conditions you want, whatever. But if a guy gets killed on your site, I'm coming down hard. You're going to jail.
Right.
I'm going to say, okay, no, I'm not opening my company in your jurisdiction. I'm not going to hire those people. I'm not going to pay that corporate tax. I'm going elsewhere because I don't know if I'm going to be held liable for conditions outside
Okay.
of my control.
But the reason I'm portraying it to you this way is because I feel
Yeah.
I'm giving you your wet dream. I'm giving you what you asked for. I'm giving you no government control, no statism, right? I'm giving you no regulation.
You are. It's
No.
just one regulation, and it's a very, very powerful one.
Okay. All right. So let's take that a step further.
No regulation would be, if somebody gets killed, somebody gets killed. As long as you keep paying your corporate tax, I don't care.
Well-
that would be zero regulation.
Because the thing is, you have to, like, we're talking about a business operation in absence of an incentive structure, right? Other than profit. Like, so in early industrial revolution, right? Like, coal miners in
Yep.
Britain, they were 10 a penny.
Yep.
And if they died from black lung, it was no skin off the mine owner. Right?
Yeah.
He would just replace them with another one. Okay, well, I mean, that's a bad incentive structure for the owners because it left the workers with no recourse. They
Yeah.
could just be replaced.
Yeah.
But
Also, there was, I think, I don't know if this is a great analogy either, though, because black lung tended to affect it. They didn't really understand what black lung was, and black lung only manifested itself after that individual was no longer young enough to continue working in the mine.
yeah, because of the conditions in the mine.
Yeah, it was a cumulative.
It's,
Yeah,
mu-
but I
it's
mean,
much more
like-
apparent in like American
but
coal
let's
mining
say,
because
how
the guys,
about say South America or South African diamond mining,
Sure.
where guys were out and out killed, crushed in mine collapses, stuff like that. Something that's not a slow cumulative process. Like,
well, any
maybe we could use something like that,
Any-
or the child labor, where kids were getting their fingers and hands ripped off in milling machines. Say, let's use
Yeah,
something
sure.
really
So-
black and white like that.
But well, either way, I don't know that it matters. It's just that
But yeah, it is a
whether
poor
you come up
incentive.
with a government
Yeah.
a government mandated health and safety working conditions kind of legislation, or whether you create a liability structure that makes it in the business owner's best interest to ensure
health and safety.
the health
Yeah.
and safety of his employees. So it doesn't matter if it's a cumulative effect, like a chronic issue or
it's
a
true.
long-term
It's
exposure
true.
issue or
Yep.
an immediate danger to life and health kind of issue. It's the society has to figure out a way
Exactly.
to do one or the other.
Right.
I think you and I would generally prefer an incentive structure that keeps
Yes.
the government out of it. So that's an
Yes.
increased liability. That's kind of
Yeah.
it's just kind of what you were saying, but
And I would also go further to say that this is, when we look back at the Victorian era and the Industrial Revolution, I think it's something of a misleading comparison, because at the time the working classes didn't have the means to represent themselves and advocate for themselves.
No.
In that there was too much illiteracy, there was no education, they didn't have the ability to advocate and represent for themselves.
No.
In today's structure, in the modern reality of where we are, the workers can do that.
yes.
For example, there are not that I know of, any major labor unions within the tech sector.
No. Not that I know.
And I don't think that's accidental.
Unless
I
you
think
count, unless you count Amazon as the tech sector, but it's only in their
yeah,
distribution
exactly. That's
sectors.
only in distribution, not in their actual
Not-
software.
Yeah, not in software.
And I think that's because those workers
They're highly-
have, what's that?
Well,
They,
it's a knowledge
Yeah.
it's a knowledge industry, and the workers are bringing the knowledge, and without the workers, the corporation doesn't have anything.
Without the miners, the coal mine does nothing.
Well, but the coal mine,
the modern workers
Yeah.
have the better ability to advocate and take action, meaningful action for themselves,
yes,
without requiring an outside agency to represent them or to act on their behalf.
Yeah, but they're also working in a white collar environment in a well-to-do part of the world. compared to mine. So in a lot of ways, you're not talking apples and apples, right? What we are talking in some ways.
Talk about independent
I am saying that we are definitely talking apples and oranges. That today's concepts
it's much different from there.
much different from, like, a lot of Victorian concepts are used as justification for state interventionism. And I'm kind of saying, well, that's apples and oranges. You can't really apply that same... That problem doesn't exist today. Our challenges are different now.
Like I said, the dynamic between management and union, the needs have changed since the 60s, right?
Since the 30s.
Well, definitely since the 30s, but there was some stuff in the 60s as well, right? And I look at those as the two kind of radical socialization changes within Canadian society, at least, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole concept of the unions, I'm not saying that they're good or bad. Where I was coming from, and when I was saying you, Mr. Business Owner, I wasn't saying that as government. I was saying that.
That was my assumption.
Let's say Trent represents Canadian society.
Okay. So like the public opinion.
Yeah.
Public view.
And that it could be public view, it could be public opinion, it could be informed, misinformed, or it could be considered what are our social values, right? And our social values have changed over time, which is why you're right. We can't look at the Dickensian times and use that as an argument for legislation today, right? What's real today? However, if I'm saying to you, okay, you go ahead and open a business, and you're saying you don't want any controls, okay, now. As a society, we value the human life of our co-citizens.
Yep. And if I do something that jeopardizes that...
So we don't want people to die, right? We think that's a bad thing. Now, how do you want to continue that conversation with me, Mr. Business Owner?
That's kind of interesting, actually. Because you're saying that you represent, say, the public mood. The public view. And let's say I've got, I got my business.
Yeah.
And let's say I do something where, because of just really poor conditions or reckless. I'm going to define poor. I'm going to say reckless conditions. I'm going to say conditions that really do not give health and safety the seriousness that, to use the legal term, a reasonable degree of attention was not given.
Yeah.
And let's say we have an accident and say 3 workers are killed. And then the public mood is so outraged that there is an instant and total boycott of my products overnight. And I am pushed from the market because people are just disgusted with my company. Say, no, I am not going to go into the store and buy that guy's product, given the way he treated those, or given the way how he allowed those conditions that cost 3 workers their lives. I want nothing to do with this individual.
So
other shareholders say, I'm selling my stock. I don't want to be associated with this guy.
So what I'm hearing from you,
that would be pretty fair. I don't see how anybody could complain about that.
Okay,
because that's millions of individuals making their own free choices to hold that corporate entity accountable for its actions.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is laissez-faire, supply and demand, right? Just no rules.
No, I'm not saying I advocated that, but I'm saying if what you proposed there worked,
I'm not.
It would be effective. I don't know if it can.
No. What my last question was? Yeah. Okay, right. You want to open a business.
Yep.
You don't want any regulations. You don't want any state control, right? As a society, we expect a lot of ourselves. We don't want our people to die. Now, so you stated your demands. Your preference. Your preference is you don't want any regulation.
Is he of the society or separate from it? He's of it, right?
Doesn't matter.
So does he share the values of the society, or is he a
foreign investor?
Or
is that what you mean?
Yeah, with a different set of moral values and a different.
Right. Well, I mean,
can we say, for the sake of argument, I am of the society?
Well, let's.
I think we.
I'm going to argue. it could be either case,
Okay.
right? Because the commerce, because
But
I'm
you're going to
hearing
get different results if he is of the society and he shares the values, right?
But the point is this, right? What does, because this is what I hear from you guys. No state control, no regulation, right? None, right? Ideally, we want none, right? As a society, we have certain expectations. As that's our preference, right? And Trent doesn't like rules for their own sake. Mm-hmm. If I could trust my fellow men to behave without rules, I'd be fine with it, right? I'm not looking to impose rules for the sake of it. So I'm asking the question now of you guys.
Yep.
Okay, you're of my society. You're not of my society, right? I pose the same question to both of you, right? How do you want to proceed from here, right? Because I want you to be here, and I want you to have what you want, right? But all I want is what I want in return.
Right.
Now, if something goes wrong, how are we defining what is wrong?
Right.
How are we defining the severity of that? How
I
are we
would
defining?
answer that by saying, I am not asking for zero regulation.
Yeah, we're not anarchists.
Exactly. Yeah. I am asking for an environment that sees regulation as a last resort and seeks minimal regulation and abandons that only incrementally and when need is identified. So I think we understand there is a need for regulation.
Okay.
There is a role for it, absolutely. And I say this in the same spirit when I say not all coercion is bad.
I was going to say.
There is a need for regulation, but we feel it should be minimalist and only approached as a last resort. Say, has every alternative to regulation, in other words, the hand of the state, been attempted? Have we tried every other method? And if we can honestly look at that and say, yes, we have, and we still have this problem, then I say, okay, this is a role for the state.
Okay.
We've exhausted our other options. This is a role for the state.
Then I would say, again, and drawing the distinction between state and society, again, as a member of the society, I'm saying, okay, that's good. But if you fuck up, you own that fuck up and you pay for the fuck up.
Yep.
Right?
Just
and that's what I feel is missing.
Just like we can say, like state and society are different things, right? Can we identify policies that our company wishes to follow that we feel are necessary that maybe my competitors do not? But I feel that, I can look at it and say, well, yeah, you know what? Maybe this increases my bottom end. But I also feel that in the long run, it's going to minimize turnover of my staff and that it's going to benefit me, kind of in the long run. Well, when we look at the idea of the role of the state, legislation, there's a certain segment of society that sees that the state, that government, doesn't really look at it as to whether or not government is the most efficient actor in these situations or in these questions, but sees the government as the only morally acceptable actor, in that the state is perceived as neutral and benign and not self-interested, as compared to a private concern, which is agended, biased, and biased towards its own profit and its own advantage, and inherently self-interested. And I think this is a major difference in perception, in that Steve and I think that the state shares those inherent characteristics with any private corporation, that it is not neutral, it is not benign, it is inherently self-interested, it is no better than the other than private institutions. And in fact, morally, it is a little bit worse because it has the power of legislation behind it, which corrupts its movements.
I mean, so how long have we been going today? It's an hour and 3/4?
Yeah, and we probably should wrap up.
Well, this is a perfect point.
I gotta get
because
rolling.
we finally get into our coercion. I think we're right on the threshold of the coercion conversation, which is the great big gray area between the 4 to 6 to 8 poles of the axes
There you
that
go.
we've been looking to discuss here. So.
Okay.
All right. We'll
Thanks,
call
folks.
it. And for anyone who's actually still listening after all this,
After all of this.
digression,
It must have been a
about-
very long drive.
yeah. We thank you, and if you need to contact us and comment, complicatedpod@gmail.com, and please rate us on Apple or Spotify if you listen to us. And thanks, everybody.